It's amazing, isn't it? AI is just everywhere in global business these days. But with all that speed comes this real need for, well, some rules of the road,
Yeah,
especially across borders.
absolutely. The potential is massive, no doubt. But yeah, we have to be careful too. And that's where, good regulation steps in, hopefully guiding things the right way.
Which actually leads us perfectly into our topic today. We're doing a deep dive into the EU's Artificial Intelligence Act. Now, that might sound like, oh, that's Europe's problem, but its impact, it's way bigger than you might think, especially for businesses right here in North America.
Exactly. And guiding us through this is a really insightful article by David Heath. It's called The EU AI Act's Ripple Effect on Global Integration Compliance. He looks at it from all these angles: data, integration, AI itself,
Yeah.
B2B, even things like MFT.
Mm. So what we want to do today, our mission, if you like, is to really unpack this EU law, figure out the key things it means for any business handling data that, somehow touches the EU. Okay, so let's dig in. First thing that jumps out, and David Heath highlights this, is just how far this act reaches. It's not just for companies in the EU, is it?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
So the act officially entered into force August 1st, 2024. And it uses this idea of output-based jurisdiction. Basically, if the results or the outputs of an AI system are used inside the EU, the act applies. Doesn't matter where the company providing it or using it is based.
So like those big North American B2B integration hubs, the ones constantly swapping data with European partners.
Precisely those. Think about it. If a hub here in North America uses AI to, say, process purchase orders or maybe invoices for a client over in Germany or France,
Even if all their tech, their servers are physically here.
yep, they're potentially covered by the act. David Heath mentions this specifically: data exchange platforms handling logistics info for European clients. They fall into this too. It's a really significant extraterritorial scope.
Wow. Okay, that seems familiar. It kind of gives me deja vu with GDPR. The big data privacy regulation that also had this huge global ripple effect. Is that a fair comparison?
That's an excellent comparison, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. GDPR definitely set a precedent for EU regulations reaching beyond its borders. And the AI Act seems to be cast in that same mold. It really signals how the EU plans to regulate these global technologies moving forward.
Okay, so the reach is wide. Got it. But what does it actually require companies to do? David Heath talks about this interesting shift moving from just data privacy to something called data provenance. What's that about?
Right, this is a really crucial point. GDPR, as you know, is mostly about whether you have the legal right to transfer and process personal data. It's about
Yeah.
permission, consent, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
The AI Act, especially Article 10 and Heads Up, that part kicks in August 2nd, 2026. It shifts the focus. It asks how the data you feed into your AI systems is handled. It's about the data's backstory.
It gets backstory, like where it came from.
Exactly. Where did it originate? How is it cleaned up, prepared? Is it properly documented? And crucially, is it being watched for potential biases that might skew the AI's results?
Okay. So it's less about can we use this name and address and more about is this data set fair and accurate?
You've got it. For systems classified as high risk, the Act gets very specific. The data has to be relevant, representative, and as error-free as possible. That's a direct quote,
It's like
basically.
relevant, representative, error-free. Okay.
And there's more. Companies need strong governance controls in place to actively spot and fix what's called statistical drift.
Statistical drift. What's that exactly?
It's when the data the AI sees in the real world starts to change over time compared to the data it was trained on. And that change can mess up the model's performance or fairness if you don't catch it. The Act says you need ongoing checks.
Okay, that sounds like quite a bit more work, especially for those North American hubs that have already jumped through the GDPR hoops for data transfers. How does this layer on top?
Well, David Heath explains it well. They'll essentially need to build and maintain what he calls a parallel data provenance register. Think of it like a super detailed logbook or map for any data field used in an AI-boosted workflow.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Let's say you have an AI tool that flags potentially fraudulent transactions, or maybe a large language model that helps classify incoming EDI messages, those electronic business documents.
Right.
For both of those, you need this register. It has to show clearly where the data for each field came from, how it's processed, verified, checked for bias, the whole 9 yards. It's moving beyond do we have consent to can we prove this data is trustworthy enough for AI.
It's really about building that verifiable chain of custody for the data itself, not just the permission to use it.
Precisely. Demonstrable trustworthiness of the data foundation.
Now, David Heath also talks about Article 9, focusing on risk management across the AI's entire life cycle. This sounds like it's not just a set up and forget kind of thing.
Oh, absolutely not. Article 9 is all about continuous obligation. If an AI capability falls into that high-risk category, and Heath gives examples like AI used in credit scoring, maybe hiring decisions, or scheduling for critical infrastructure.
Yeah, things with pretty major consequences.
Exactly. Those systems must operate within a risk management framework that's not only documented but is continuously updated.
Continuously updated, so you can't just tick a box once.
No way. The Act specifically calls for an iterative process. You have to keep identifying potential hazards, figuring out the risks, putting mitigations in place, and then checking if they work. And you do this again and again throughout the AI's entire life, from the drawing board right up until you switch it off for good.
That sounds demanding. I know many companies here in the States are already working with frameworks like the NIST AI Risk Management Framework. How does that fit in? Is it enough?
That's a great question. David Heath points out that, yeah, many North American firms are familiar with NIST, which offers excellent best practices. But the EU AI Act kind of takes those principles, or similar ones, and turns them from voluntary best practice into a hard legal requirement.
Ah, okay. So NIST is helpful, but not sufficient on its own for EU compliant.
Right. North American hubs will probably need to blend the two. They'll need to take their existing NIST-based approaches and make sure they meet the specific mandatory conformity checks the EU Act demands before they can, say, roll out an AI-powered update to their European clients.
So formalizing best practices to meet a legal standard. Got it. Another point David Heath raises, Article 12. This seems to really ramp up the need for audit trails, tamper-proof ones specifically. What's the big change here?
Yeah, Article 12 is a big one for traceability, especially in those high-risk systems. It mandates the automatic recording of events, basically logging everything significant that happens.
Okay, logging is standard practice, but what's different?
Well, two things, mainly. First, the scope. It goes way beyond typical MFT logs, tracking file moves or checksums. The Act requires logs of things like every single inference call. That's each time the AI makes a decision or prediction.
Every single one.
For high-risk systems, yes. Plus, you need to log the specific dataset versions used, any prompt templates involved if it's generative AI, and critically, anytime a human steps in to override the AI's output.
Wow. Okay, so if a person corrects the AI, that correction and maybe why it was made needs to be logged.
That's the implication,
Yeah.
yeah. You need that full picture. And the second big thing, retention. These logs need to be kept for it, wait for it, up to 10 years.
10 years.
Yeah.
Seriously, that's a very long time in the tech world. That seems like a massive data storage and management challenge.
It really is, yeah. And Heath points out the consequence for North American hubs. They need to look at their existing log retention policies, maybe based on SOC2 or ISO 27001, and figure out how to harmonize them with these very specific, very long-term EU requirements. The goal is so that, if needed, regulators could reconstruct an AI decision affecting someone in the EU, potentially years down the line.
Okay, this all sounds like a major undertaking. Time, resources, technical changes. What are the deadlines people need to watch? And what happens if they don't comply, the penalties.
Right, the timeline is already moving. David Heath reminds us the ban on what they call unacceptable risk AI. Things like untargeted facial scraping in public that's been in effect since February 2nd, 2025.
Okay, that's passed. What's next?
Transparency rules for general-purpose AI models, like large language models, they kick in August 2nd, 2025. And then the big one, the full suite of obligations for high-risk systems, that lands on August 2nd, 2027. So the clock is definitely ticking.
And the fines. We know from GDPR the EU doesn't mess around with enforcement.
No, they certainly don't. Fines for violating the AI Act can go up to $35 million, or 7% of a company's total worldwide annual turnover, whichever amount is higher.
7%. Wow. That could be absolutely enormous for some companies.
Exactly. Heath stresses that these penalties can, in some situations, actually be higher than the GDPR fines. So yeah, the financial risk is very real. For any firm relying on European supply chains or customers, putting this off is, well, it's a very risky gamble.
Okay, message received. So for those North American B2B hubs listening, thinking, okay, what do we do now? What are the practical first steps David Heath suggests?
He lays out some clear actions. First off, inventory. You need to know exactly what AI components you're using in your workflows that touch EU data or outputs used in the EU.
Takes sense. Know what you have.
Then classify. Figure out which risk tier each component falls into under the Act: unacceptable, high, limited, or minimal. That determines your obligations. After that, it's about updating your data governance playbooks. Really nail down that data lineage tracking we talked about and document your bias testing procedures and results.
What about the business side, like contracts with EU customers?
Critical point. Heath advises reviewing and amending those contracts. You'll likely need to add specific clauses about AI audit rights, maybe shared protocols for how you'll handle incidents together if something goes wrong with an AI system.
And technically, inside the system.
Technical teams need to get to work updating logging frameworks, making sure they can capture all that required info, model inputs, outputs, overrides, dataset versions, and store it securely, immutably for that long retention period.
It sounds like a lot, but maybe. Is there an upside? Could getting this right actually be a competitive advantage?
Absolutely. David Heath makes that exact point. Instead of seeing this purely as a compliance burden, companies that get ahead of the curve can market themselves as AI Act ready. Imagine being able to tell your European partners, we've got this covered.
Yeah.
That could be a powerful differentiator, turning a regulatory headache into a selling point.
Interesting. So, wrapping things up a bit, it really feels like, as David Heath argues, the EU AI Act is kind of setting a new global standard for machine intelligence, much like GDPR did for personal data.
That's a perfect summary. If you want to do business with Europe or have your AI's outputs used there, you'll eventually need to align with this. It's becoming the baseline.
And for those North American B2B hubs, the message seems to be view this act not just as a hurdle, but maybe as a blueprint for building more trustworthy, more auditable data exchange systems. That's the key to future transatlantic commerce.
I think that's exactly right. Those who embrace that perspective will be the best positioned, no question.
So the key takeaway for everyone listening, the EU AI Act isn't just an EU issue. It has major far-reaching implications if your AI systems, or even just their outputs, have any connection to the EU. It demands a pretty fundamental shift in thinking about data governance and AI management.
hmm And that really brings us to a final thought for you, our listener, to maybe ponder. Given this ripple effect we've been discussing, how do you think this EU AI Act trend might shape global AI standards in the next few years?
Yeah.
Okay, and perhaps more importantly, what proactive steps can you start taking now in your own context to make sure you stay ahead of the curve and aren't left playing catch up?